everyone, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing the sequel to my worst books according to GoodReads video, and we are going to be doing the best books that I've read according to GoodReads. Although, just like in that one, it's called according to GoodReads because I am a slave to the algorithm, and in fact these rankings are going to be based on my Storygraph account. But I will mention the ratings of the two websites if they vary greatly. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the video. I'm going to start off with an honorable mention before we get to my top 10, and with a 4.28 that is Red, White, and Royal Blue by Mcquisten. I decided to include this because it is a very, very popular book and just kind of wanted to show what the general feelings of this book are in terms of ranking. When I read this initially, I gave it a 5 stars, but I think upon further reflection, it's probably closer to a 4 or a 4.5. Mostly because it hasn't really stuck with me the same way other books have. I think at the time I just was enjoying the novelty of having a MLM contemporary romance. And it is an interesting concept, but I wouldn't say at the same time there's anything in it that is particularly gripping to me personally. However, it is very highly rated on both websites and it has a very, very large pool of ratings to pull from. So I think this definitely is a book that a lot of people will enjoy. Okay, with that out of the way, let's move into my top 10. And the 10th best book that I've read with a 4.29 is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This book, I understand why it's up here. I think in a lot of ways it's very similar to The Secret History, almost more like The Secret History Light, in that it's a little bit shorter and easier to read. I think I would also describe it as being a very trendy book because it really hits on a lot of aspects of the dark academia subculture. I did really enjoy it when I read it. I gave it a 4.5. I think this would make a really, really good movie adaptation. That's just me kind of putting that energy out into the world because I think this book really lends itself well to being adapted for the screen. The next book with a 4.31 is The City Beautiful by Aiden and Polidoros. This book only has 248 ratings on the Storygraph, and it has a 4.19 on GoodReads with 1,200 reviews. So it is definitely a more underground book that not a lot of people have read, but I'm here to say that it's a really good book and I wish more people were interested in it. I really like this book. There was a lot of things in it that I personally really enjoyed because it had a murder mystery aspect, it was historical fiction, but also had an MLM romance in it. And the romance is very much on the back burner, but at the same time, I really, really loved the dynamic between Alter and Frankie. I thought they were really good together. It's definitely underrated, and I really, really enjoyed it. I definitely want to get a physical copy of the book in the future, although I've also heard that the audiobook for this is particularly good. Unfortunately, I don't think it's available at my library, so I might have to actually seek it out and try and buy it on Scribd or something like that. But I really enjoyed it, and I think it was definitely a book I will try to reread in the future. Next book on this list with a 4.33 is Darius the Great Is Not Okay by Adib Khorram. This book is definitely one of my all-time favorite books in general, definitely one of my all-time favorites of the YA queer contemporary genre. Although I will say that the queer aspect of it is definitely on the lighter side because throughout the first book at least, Darius is not out to anyone in his family, and it becomes a lot more prevalent in the second book. But overall, I just really, really like this book. It made me cry in the end, just kind of the dynamic between Darius and his father is just really, really interesting and really heart-wrenching. But there's a lot of other lessons and messages that are woven into the story really, really fluidly. I think the second book also continues that theme, and I think it's just kind of a testament to Adib Khorram's writing ability. So yes, definitely interested in this, and I will be looking at other books that he has coming out in the future. The next book on this list, narrowly beating out Darius the Great with a 4.34, is Lilith's Brood by Octavia Butler. This book kind of almost feels like cheating because it is 3 books that have now been repackaged in recent years into one. The original books are Dawn, Adulthood Rights, and Imago. When I originally read this book, I gave it a 3.5, and I only rated it that, I think, because I felt like it was a little too long. And maybe that was because of the fact that it technically is 3 books that are combined into one book, so it just kind of felt like it dragged through. But if I read them as 3 individual books as sequels of each other, I don't know if I would have had that same response. Because I really enjoyed the world building, I thought the aliens in the book were really interesting and unique. If I was going to rank the books also, I think number 1 is Imago, number 2 would be Dawn, and number 3 would be Adulthood Rights. I really, really liked Imago the most because I thought the narrator in that was the most interesting. And I also thought the ending in that just really made everything come full circle, and it was a really satisfying, clear, concise ending. Next book on this list with a 4.35 is Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. This book I think has grown in popularity over the years. This book is a very unique experience, but at the same time I think it's really, really interesting and really, really well crafted. I think people usually have one of 2 reactions to this. They either get so confused and disoriented with the way it's written for the first 100 pages that they give up and don't continue on with the story at all, or they still are confused with the first 100 pages but then carry through and then see the way that all of the themes are being laid out in the story and end up really, really enjoying it. And I think this is a book that really lends itself to being reread multiple times so that you can kind of know what you're getting into when you go back and read it for a second time. I think it's written very interestingly. I really like the character of Piranesi because he has kind of this really interesting lens that you're reading through with sort of like a childlike wonder to him. It's definitely not what I had expected going into it, but I did really, really enjoy it. And it does make me interested in reading Susanna Clarke's other main novel, which is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I think that's the name of it. Apparently this book is very widely loved, but it also is very long. I think it's like over 1,000 pages. But there's also a miniseries version of it, so I don't know, maybe when I get over my fear of reading really, really long books, I'll give it a shot. Because her writing style is really interesting and engaging, so I think it would be definitely an interesting book to read. The next book on this list with a 4.38 is Ace of Spades by Farida Abihei Yemide. I'm going to eventually include this book in one of my reading every queer YA book in my library video, but it is definitely rough. It's very hard to get through at some points, but at the same time I think it's a very interesting and well-crafted dark YA thriller. But I can also understand like why it has such a high rating, and it's definitely one that I would recommend. The next 3 books on this list all have the same rating of 4.4. The first one is Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. This book I gave a 4 stars to. I definitely enjoyed it while I read it, and I think it's a book that I definitely would recommend to people if they're first getting into the queer YA genre, because it does have a really fun fantasy element to it, but at the same time I don't really think it's super memorable in the way it's written necessarily. The next book on this list with a 4.4 is Felix Ever After by Case and Calendar. This book I also gave 4 stars to, and I have kind of the same reaction to it now as I do to Cemetery Boys. I think it's a good book, and I think it's a book that will do well in the hands of teens that are beginning to kind of understand and question their sexuality or their gender expression. Hi, editing Nina popping in here to explain my reasoning a little better because I definitely didn't do that in the original clip. I just wanted to say that I really enjoyed both these books, and I think the way they talk about trans identity and the formation of gender and sexuality is really good. I just didn't connect to it as much personally because I'm not someone who has ever questioned my identity in the ways the main characters of these books have. But I totally get why they are so well loved, and I think if you are in a position of either Yadriel or Felix, then these will probably be 5-star books for you. And the last 4.4 on this list is Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe by Benjamin Eller. This book for me is definitely a higher ranking in my mind compared to The Cemetery Boys and Felix Ever After, and I think the reasons for that are twofold. One is that I think I really enjoyed the writing style and I find it really, really funny. The other thing is that I feel like all the characters are really fleshed out and seem like real people, which is not something I necessarily could say, at least for Felix Ever After. I feel like a lot of these side characters in that book are very one note. I rated Aristotle and Dante 5 stars when I read it, and I still think I would stand by that. Maybe it would go down to a 4.5, but at the same time I think about some of the parts of that book that I really, really enjoyed, and they just really make me all warm and fuzzy inside. We're on to number 1, the best book that I have apparently ever read, and it's one that I think I would agree with. I think this book is very, very good, and a lot of people agree with me. For 6, that is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. This book obviously is going to have a very high ranking because it is very, very popular, and it's often touted as being an incredibly good book, which I do think can sometimes work against a book's favor, because obviously if you have a lot of people going in with really high expectations and they don't have those expectations met, then they're going to give it maybe a lower ranking than they would if they just kind of picked it up out of a whim. But I think this book fully lives up to its hype. It's just so amazing in a lot of different ways. Obviously the characterization and the story that's being told is really interesting, but also Madeline Miller has a really poetic and deep way of writing that really draws you into the story. And I think the fact that she took 10 years to write this book really is a testament to her ability to craft a really well done story. Because it is a book where it feels like every single line is in its proper place and was put there for a reason. Obviously it's a tale as old as time, so the story is one that you can look through a lot of different lenses, and I think that it kind of started a new resurgence of popular myths being retold. And I don't necessarily want to fully claim that she's the person that kind of reinvigorated this mythology retelling in recent years, but it definitely is a book that is a cornerstone in that genre. So those are the top books that I've ever read according to the Storygraph. Similar to the question I asked in my worst books video, is there a book that you have read that you really, really dislike, but it is just genuinely loved by the entire book community? I honestly don't know if I have one of those. I think it might be a case where a book is really, really overhyped and it just kind of falls flat for me. But I don't think there's a book that I've ever really hated that was ever recommended to me by the general booktube community. It's mostly that I read a book that is very well received and hyped up, but then it's not a book that's in my usual genre, so I just kind of have a little bit of growing pains as I experience the genre for the first time. And sometimes it ends up being that I realize that this genre just wasn't really for me, and that's why I'm not getting as much out of it, of the book, as other people have. Anyway, that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching as always. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!